This is Stereoactive Presents. I'm your host, Jeremiah McVay, and in this episode, I'm joined once again by Joe Virgillito to discuss what's been happening in the 2024 election cycle. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Great to be back.
For those who may have missed our first two discussions of the 2024 election, Joe and I both used to produce podcasts that covered, among other things, politics. Back in 2020, we did a pretty regular series of discussions on our old show, which I hosted and he contributed to leading up to that election. And we decided to do a handful of discussions leading up to this year's election on November 5th. First, Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz, the Republican and Democratic nominees for vice president, debated in New York, hosted by CBS. Second, both the Los Angeles Times and Washington Post withheld endorsements for Kamala Harris at the direction of their billionaire owners. Third, John Kelly, the longest-serving White House chief of staff during Trump's term in office, said in an interview that he believes that his former boss is indeed a fascist. This came apparently in response to Trump saying he would be willing to use active-duty military personnel against American citizens. This also came after it was reported by Bob Woodward that General Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump, had called the former president, quote-unquote, fascist to the core, and again, quote, the most dangerous person to this country, end quote. Fourth, former President Donald Trump held a rally at Madison Square Garden that many compared with the 1939 rally of American Nazis at the same venue. And fifth, Vice President Kamala Harris held a rally on the ellipse in Washington, D.C., the same spot where Trump urged his followers on January 6th, 2021, to march on the U.S. Capitol, of course, ultimately resulting in an insurrection and an attempt to overthrow the 2020 election. So, yeah, those are five pretty big things. Of course, they're not everything that has happened. It seems like endless news all the time, but those are some of the things that I think have stuck out the most to my mind. But Joe, what are your overarching thoughts about the state of the race since we last spoke about it? And I'll just throw in anything else I missed that you were paying attention to or remember.
My overarching thoughts are that I'm really excited to write in Joe Biden. I mean, I can't wait to finally get my vote going here. This has been one of the more memorable presidential races of my lifetime. It feels like one of the most significant, and it feels like I think it's fair to say at this point, I mean, COVID being the factor it was in 2020, it feels like the most unhinged in both directions. And I've gotten the sense, and an overarching sense, to go with the verbiage of the question, that there's just been so many points where it feels like neither of these campaigns want to win or know how to win. They're just doing everything that they can to like make the other one look worse. And it just feels like as we get closer to this, it's just the crushing, maw of time. I'm so ready for it to be over. I'm obviously fascinated by, what's going to happen in the next week. It feels like even in the last couple of days, there have been a couple of pretty big developments, some righteous outrage, some fake outrage, which I'm sure we'll get to. But also just it's been wild. And I feel like every time I come on here, I sort of like try to put it in perspective. Like, this has only been going on with Kamala Harris in the race for like, is it even 3 months that she's been the nominee? And it just feels like this has been happening for like 2 years, which is just speaks to what this whole process has been like.
Totally. And I think the fake outrage thing that you might be referring to, it's something that I guess happened just yesterday. I feel like I've barely even heard it at this point. I was hearing reaction to it before I knew what the hell was said. But I think you're referring to Joe Biden apparently calling Trump supporters garbage and then kind of backtracking and saying he was talking about this guy at the aforementioned Madison Square Garden rally who referred to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. And then I think at this point, Kamala Harris has even tried to distance herself from Biden calling these people garbage as if it should matter at all.
Right,
But
right.
is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, no, I mean that's the funniest thing about it is the fact that, like, a day beforehand, in reaction to that, Puerto Rico joke that was made at the rally, JD Vance, among other
Yeah.
people, was just like, we shouldn't be getting overly sensitive about everything that's said in the United States. I'm so tired of people overreacting to things. And, people are saying people don't have a sense of humor. They don't understand the context, whatever. And then, a day and a half later, they're
Hmm.
filling their diapers about a comment that Biden made, again, that was taken out of context to whatever degree, but is also just like par for the course as far as like American political
Yeah.
rhetoric on a national scale at this point. Nothing really particularly out of the ordinary, or even, again, like if this were 10 years ago, yeah, or even 8 years ago, obviously, we had the deplorables comment with Hillary that seemed to really, touch a nerve.
Yeah.
But we're so far beyond that pale that it doesn't, the outrage just rings as so hollow. And it's just, it's still fascinating to see that people can try to drum themselves up, but it feels very fake. It's so contrived.
Yeah. I mean, I think that so many people in these election cycles are always trying to fit things into a narrative template that they've seen before. And so when you have Biden saying garbage, they're just remembering the deplorable comment of Hillary Clinton 8 years ago and trying to make it into that. Both the Republicans and the media. They're like, that was a thing that somehow stuck last time. So this should be too. And it's just so fucking dumb. It's
Right.
just so stupid.
I mean, why is Biden? I know he's the president, right? But he's pretty separated from this campaign. Why is he speaking? Why is he
Yeah.
saying? Why is he commenting on this? There's no good that can come from it. We know how he feels. And the other thing that sort of like dovetails with the hypocrisy is Biden has spent his entire presidency. He spent his presidential campaign in 2020 and what existed of it in 2024 courting Republicans, openly inviting them
Hmm.
into the tent, openly saying, we want Republicans to vote for this guy is not a Republican. This guy is a danger to Republicans. The Republican Party isn't healthy. So if you think that he's suddenly turning around and calling all Republicans garbage, like, you're willfully
Yeah.
misreading the statement, and you don't have a ton of shame to begin with. I mean, obviously, we're talking about like JD Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy. Like, we're not, there's not a lot of shame in the cup as it is, but it just gets emptied out. I mean, when it comes to things like this.
Yeah. Great point. I think it's just ginned up stuff, and we'll see if it actually moves any needles or whatever. But I don't know. It, I can't imagine that it's really going to matter in the long run.
Well, we'll see,
But maybe
obviously,
I'm
but
wrong.
yeah.
All right. So why don't we get into our first real big topic here? So in our last discussion, which was a while ago now, we spoke about the possible implications of the then looming vice presidential debate, especially whether it or similar debates in the past have mattered at all. So what's the verdict? Like, I know it was a little bit ago now, but what did you think of that debate? And like, any impact of it, if there were any, has it lasted? Has it changed anything? What do you think, Joe?
No. That's the short answer. I was incredibly bored watching it. There were a couple of moments, I think, in there that were a little bit sort of intriguing. I was sort of, and I think a lot of people who, I think what I said going into or during our last discussion, going into the vice presidential debate, was the fact that it could be a really interesting contrast between a guy who is sort of um, a shell of the guy that he's debating against. In other words, JD Vance is a like kind of this husk of like an all-American, Midwestern, wholesome person, but really he seems like kind of a soulless political entity that is filled with venture capital money and these like grandish visions of the glorious party taking over and remaking the United States, whereas like Tim Walz is the, again, with his own flaws here and there, like more of the actual wholesome, like teacher, National Guardsman,
Hmm.
Midwesterner that is like, actually what they got JD Vance to cosplay as. And the thing that kind of upset me as somebody who was watching this is that contrast wasn't really distinctive watching those two guys debate. Like, they agreed with each other a lot. It seemed like they were deferring to one another quite a lot, which, again, like, it happens in these vice presidential debates. These are not people at the top of the ticket, I guess, for a reason, or at least they know their
Right.
role within it. So they're not trying to, get a bunch of attention cast on themselves. But all that being said, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more in the way of that. But, to be fair, that was all kind of like theater of the mind for me, and I think for a lot of other people. So for it to fall short on that is kind of on us for building up any kind of expectation with it. I didn't really glean anything from it. Neither of those guys did or said anything that was particularly revealing. And I'll be honest with you, I forgot about it a week later. I don't know how you felt, but for me, it was a very insignificant moment.
I'm kind of two minds about it. I don't know where I come down, really, because I do think that at that point in the cycle, it was pretty clear that JD Vance was not doing well in terms of public perception. And I did feel like his performance in that, where he seemed like this somewhat genial person who was, as you were saying, deferring to his debate partner and just sort of like being kind of easygoing in conversation and stuff. Like I thought it normalized him to some degree, or maybe gave some people like clearance to accept him as like a decent person, even though I think if you listen to the content of the things he's saying instead of the style in which he's saying it, it's total garbage, to use that word again. And then I'm not sure how much of that stuck in the long run. I just have no clue, because he did kind of fumble at the end of the debate when Walz asked him point blank, like, do you think Trump won or lost in 2020? And he couldn't give an answer at all. Then Walz had his quote of the night, calling it a damning non-answer. And that seemed to be the only quote from the entire debate then. So as much as like the previous hour and a half or whatever it was, seemed to be going, I would say, mostly in Vance's favor. I'm not sure if any of that stuck, because of that final moment. Is like, you got to pass the finish line for this stuff to actually work in your favor sometimes, So I don't know. I guess I'm kind of like I said, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was a net zero in the end.
Yeah.
Whereas it seemed like maybe it wouldn't be for a while. You know what I mean?
I think you kind of hit it on the head, is that Vance, I'll give this to him. I mean, I don't have a very high opinion of him as a politician or as a person. I'll admit that outright. But he is, as a politician is concerned, he's very affable. He can present himself. He can speak in a way that makes him sound like he's well read. I believe he is well read. He is very articulate. He can deliver an answer eloquently. But you said it, is the content of what he's saying. If you actually listen to the words, it's mostly drivel. I mean, to be honest with you, he's falling back on narratives. He has talking points. He's very good at hitting those things. He's very good at coming across as a composed speaker. And I think, to your point, I think he looked a little bit better than Walz in the debate stage. There was a couple of like still shots of Walz looking kind of flustered and making big eyes, kind of looking like a frog up there.
Yeah.
But again, like, it's the classic like debate question, like goes back to like Nixon and Kennedy. Like, if you watch the debate, Kennedy won. If you listen to the debate, Nixon won. That was the whole trope back in 1960. It's like, if you watch this, you could say that Vance held himself together a little better and maybe made Walz look silly, or Walz made himself look silly with some of his reactions. But then you get down to the nitty gritty of it. The reason I don't think that stuck, in terms of what you're saying about like denying the loss of the 2020 election, is Trump says that at this point every other day. Anytime he steps in front of a crowd, he repeats that he won. He repeats, this lie that they actually have more voters, and so we're looking forward to winning again, like just like we won in 2020. So, as I guess fundamental as it is to get him to say or not say that on national TV, to not admit that they lost in 2020 or that Trump lost in 2020, I don't think that even comes close to moving the needle now, which again is another example of just how far this has gone, where like, we know this dude lost. He spent 4 years lying about it, is still lying about it, will not admit it even on national television. And we're just like, well, obviously he's not going to admit it. I mean, that's how this guy,
Trump,
and then obviously the people that work for him, move our center of expectation. And now it's just at this point, it's like, of course he didn't admit it. Of course he didn't acquiesce that they lost, because to do that would be to give up the entire game.
Yeah, I feel like in a race that is so statistically close as this one is and has been basically since Harris stepped in as the new candidate, it's like any of these moments, their interpretation is just going to depend on what ultimately happens. If she and Walz win, that moment will be looked back on as helpful. If they don't, it will be looked on as inconsequential, and everything gets kind of written by the winners or around the winners, as the case may be, all of this is just like horse race stuff that sort of, it matters in so much as it plays into narratives and like, I don't know, it's not substance really.
Yeah.
Although I mean, I'll take that back a little bit because it is substantive whether or not someone believes a giant lie that has, helped to threaten our democracy. But,
It is, but it also, when you have a candidate and a party that is openly lying this much, it removes that meaning every time there's a new lie told, and it just gets layered into. It's not necessarily that you start to believe the lie, but it's that like you accept that like they're just going to keep lying about it, so it does mean less.
Right,
and then it's like you said. I mean, obviously, it could come to have an impact down the line if they were to lose again. But that if Trump and Vance win, they're going to be saying, "Oh yeah, we won just like we won in 2020." Like it's going to be rinse and repeat.
And they'll be saying, even if they do win, they're going to say, well, we actually won by more than we won by, just like they said in 2016 when he said, like, I actually should have won California and, all these crazy things. But anyway, why don't we move on to our next topic?
Yeah, he should win every state, if not for all the other voters.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to someone talk about this, and they were basically like, if you asked Trump point blank, is there a state you lost in 2020,
right,
would he have an answer? And the answer is probably no, he wouldn't, because he thinks he probably did win every state because illegal people, quote unquote, illegal people voted. And,
yeah, it's like we would have won the game if it weren't for all the points the other team scored,
Exactly. So were you surprised at all by the LA Times and Washington Post decision to not formally endorse a candidate for president? Decisions that were made by their billionaire owners, in spite of their editorial boards, of course.
Again, I got to disappoint you with a short answer. No, I was not surprised by this at all. I feel like the phrasing of your question kind of laid out why one shouldn't be surprised about this. Mainly the two words billionaire owners. It's not a shocking thing at all. I think the reason it became such an issue, or that it is such an issue for obviously the people who work for these newspapers and the people who subscribe to them or who have decided to cancel their subscriptions to them, is the timing of it. It just feels like this is something that just like the height of cowardice to do it 2 weeks before Election Day. I've heard, some people say this, like, if you had announced this in June or like, some point in the last few months, you just said, you know what, back in the day before Watergate, the Washington Post didn't endorse presidential candidates. And then after Watergate, they obviously had a good reason for thinking that maybe it'd be a good idea to weigh in on that. But this is a decision that I just don't see how you can take what Trump has been saying over the last several months. I mean, especially in the last few weeks, as far as like retribution against Democrats and using the military against political opponents and so forth, and then come out with this type of a statement and say that, and think that there isn't going to be major blowback. Like, I don't know if they anticipated it. I don't know if they cared about it. I mean, obviously they cared about it they care about it to some degree. But these are not money-making operations for these people, for these billionaires. So from a business standpoint, I think I saw like the Washington Post lost $200 million last year. They are just things for these people to own and control, and they, can use them to create narratives. And obviously there's a lot of excellent journalism that's being done at these papers. I don't mean to diminish the work that's done by the journalists and the editors that work in these places. But, from a large scale macro business standpoint, it makes sense from that perspective, but it's also incredibly cowardly as I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if they were going to make this decision and not get any blowback for it, they would have had to do it before it was clear that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee again.
Right.
Like, I think they would have had to done it like at least a year and a half, 2 years ago. But yeah, I mean, once you have Donald Trump as a nominee and you're choosing not to endorse, you're going to get some blowback about that. Because, like, I mean, hearkening back to like the whole Watergate thing, and like you said, the reason for them to have largely started endorsing in the first place, he's like that type of guy where like a Nixonian character or worse, where it's like, we need some guardrails here and we're supposed to be one of them, as the free press, supposedly.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're not a free press, unfortunately. They're bought and sold and owned by a billionaire, and he doesn't have to make money from this venture. He bought it as sort of like a pet project. I think when he bought it, like it seemed like a way for him to curry favor with the public or something, right, and just have another vehicle at the same time for him to sort of deliver his messages within certain limitations, trying to keep it still seem like an institution with its own voice.
Right.
But I mean, there's been stuff going on at the Washington Post with their publisher and editor in chief for the last like months that have kind of pulled a lot of the rug out from under their, I don't want to say pristine integrity, but it's not like the Marty Baron era anymore. It hasn't been for a while,
No.
And like you said, there's a lot of good journalism happening there. And a lot of those people, interestingly, I would say maybe bravely, even immediately pushed back on this in the Washington Post. Is kind of like weird to watch this happen, of like the paper as an institution not endorsing, and then basically having everyone who would have been part of that endorsement decision say, write in their columns, like the reason that they wrote their that they wanted to endorse, et cetera, et cetera. Then you had like the humor columnist coming out and being like, it's pathetic that it falls to me, but I endorse Kamala Harris.
Right.
There was like a political cartoon that was like making fun of the democracy dies in darkness slogan
God.
of the Post.
That slogan.
We
can do away with that one now, right?
So
time to come up with a new one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see. And I don't know, I don't think it's going to actually educate any people, but like, I do think it points to like, a lot of people just don't understand that a lot of these papers and cable news channels, whatever, have often two sides. There's like the news gathering and reporting side of the institution, and there's the opinion side,
right,
and they're not joint at the hip. And that's how you end up with a paper reporting on its own failure, essentially. And I don't know, I thought it was an interesting moment, but yeah, I'm not sure how much it matters in the end. I feel like that's something that people who are plugged in or paying attention to. And of course, the media always loves stories about the media. So
right,
it was definitely getting traction in the days following.
I mean, there's nobody's opening the day's New York Times and seeing that they endorse Kamala Harris, being like, oh, I guess I'm voting for Kamala Harris. Like nobody, like, who are we kidding? Nobody is actually looking to.
Yeah.
It's a symbolic statement based on the, as you said, the legacy of this, genuine media institution. The Washington Post is the second most important newspaper in the United States. LA Times is third or fourth. So to not have these editorial boards endorse a candidate is a big deal just from that perspective. But there is a level of like it being overblown because it's the media talking about the media, and like, there is this self-importance with journalism that I think is, again, at times very overblown, but I also think is appropriate to at least like make note of. And then I think the kicker of it all is, I don't know if it was a day or two later, Jeff Bezos publishing an op-ed in the Washington Post, basically defending his decision with the headline, let's face it, Americans don't trust the news media. And it's just like, well,
Yeah.
why would that be, Jeff? What is the
Yeah,
reason for that?
exactly.
It's like that meme from I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson, the guy in the hot dog suit. It's like, we're all trying to find the guy
Yeah,
who
yeah.
did this. Like, Americans don't trust the media. Why is that? Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, it just like nail on the fucking head. So I just it sucks. It's just another I think moment where you realize what is in control here. And
Yeah.
again, like, I'm not going to wax poetic about it. I don't think that like journalists saved us in 2016 any more than they're going to save us in 2024. But like, for the owner of the paper, who is the richest man on earth, or the second richest, whatever it is, who has more wealth than he could spend in 1,000 lifetimes, to come out and say Americans don't trust the news media when he himself owns this paper and can control its messaging is
Yeah.
it's something else. It really is quite something.
Well, I think you pointed to something there too. It is sort of a remarkable self-own for him to force them to not publish that endorsement, when if they had just published it, no one would be talking about it.
Yeah, it would not even be a story. No, not even
It wouldn't be a
remotely.
story if they
No.
endorsed. It wouldn't have been. But yeah, I think it does come down to money, and he has his own calculations. Like, I don't know how much his Blue Origin contracts are worth, but I mean, it came out pretty quickly from the Washington Post reporting side of the paper. There was apparently a pretty clear quid pro quo there of Blue
Right.
Origin execs, one of Bezos' companies, of course, meeting with Trump the same day that he killed this endorsement. You just got to look at what happened and pretty clearly guess in an educated way that Blue Origin stuff is much more. He gets a lot more out of that monetarily than he does from the more than 250,000 people who've now canceled their subscriptions. So
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not even
and
close.
it's just sad because he doesn't probably need Blue Origin either. Yeah, that's the sad part of it, is like he doesn't need either of those companies, I'm sure, at this point.
Yeah.
But whatever. He picked one pet project over the other, I guess. So our next topic. So when Harris became the Democratic nominee over the summer, there was much talk of the vibe shift and tone of joy as compared to Biden's campaign. In the closing weeks of the election, though, there's been seemingly a lot more talk, or at least more high profile discussion, of Trump's fascistic nature and threat to the nation. So, do you think this was always the directions things would go? And is it actually at odds with the positive vibe check of the early days of the campaign? Like, were we always going to end up talking about how Trump is a fascist because, in fact, Trump is a fascist?
I don't think it's possible to run against Trump or talk about Trump without discussing this. So I guess there's a level of inevitability with this kind of rhetoric. The reason that I maybe didn't expect to see them go this hard with it is because I don't think that this cuts through. I don't think that this hits with the average voter. Um, and
Hmm.
which I guess maybe should make me not surprised that this is ultimately like kind of how they tried to close things out. When I talked earlier about how like both campaigns feel like they want to lose, the Harris campaign had something really good going for a while when they were calling Republicans weird. We discussed it, as did so many other people. They
Yeah.
were going after them for just being out of touch with reality, out of touch with normal Americans, like just going into these areas of just real, like genuine extremist beliefs, or beliefs that, a few years ago we would have thought were absolutely batshit and now are just kind of like mainstream Republican talking points. Um, and they got away from that and they started kind of doing the Hillary and Biden playbook of 2016 and 2020, where they were openly campaigning with Republicans from the Bush administration. Dick Cheney, the fact that he made appearances is just to this day inexplicable to me. I don't really know who you're winning over by campaigning with Dick Cheney, who had, I believe, an 18% approval rating when he finally left the White House in 2008 or early 2009. It seems like they got away from that tack. And I don't know if it's because Kamala Harris does not have good campaign instincts. I don't know if maybe some of her wealthier donors said, hey, tone this down because we don't want you calling half of the country weird and freaks for the stuff they believe in, or we want to work with these politicians too. So just like take it easy. I don't know what the reasoning for it was. It's probably a combination of both of those things, but being the way that they sort of changed the tack of their campaign strategy, I am not surprised that we are here. And listen, like, I mean, for me, I think it's important to draw the comparison. I think it's important to call out this um, pretty overt level of fascist tendencies that Trump seems to have, without whether you call him an outright fascist or not. Like, there's a lot of if it
Hmm.
walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, right? So I think it's worth calling it out just for a
Yeah.
historical perspective. I just don't know if that's the best campaign strategy, because once you start, Nazi is like that word where, like, once you start using it, even if you're correct, even if like the place that you're coming from is a place of import, which obviously it is when it comes to this stuff, it's sort of like as soon as people hear that word, they tune it out. They're like, well, no one's as bad as the Nazis. This isn't Nazis. This is like, and so I think it's not super effective. But then again, like, I'm not surprised that we ended up here. I do think that it contrasts with, as you said at the end of the question there, and as we discussed, I think on this podcast, like a couple times ago, that like vibe of or that sort of overarching theme of joy that she was trying to, or that she started her campaign on and was trying to run on. It feels like that's sort of petered out over the last several weeks, and this sort of dovetails with that, because how can you how can you joyfully say that your opponent is a fascist? I don't know if there's any way other than
Right.
very seriously to sort of state that.
I don't know. I'm. It's hard to say because, like, I think that. I mean, is it possible that just the weird and joy thing had stopped working at some point? Because, like, at some point, the story became that even though Trump wasn't really sharing any specifics on things that seemed realistic or in line with anything he'd ever said before in his life, Harris was getting really pegged with supposedly not giving specifics on anything, even though I think she was, and they just weren't being reported on as much as she or anyone would like. But I don't know. Like, is that maybe the reason that she switched to this tack of like the specifics that she was outlining weren't getting picked up, so that she needed to kind of change something else? I don't know.
I think it's possible that like maybe the message wasn't cutting through, but like it wasn't going to cut through the way that it did in those first few weeks after the DNC anyway. Like that's when you are making
Sure.
the most movement. And then like obviously you had the debate after that,
Yeah.
which again I think we both agree she won pretty handily. So like you get the movement after that. But like
Yeah.
it's one thing to like abandon that if it's not working. It's another thing to then go. I mean, she basically tacked hard right. I mean, and there have been so many aspects of the campaign, the Harris campaign, that have been trying to appeal to the quote unquote moral Republican, the person who is a
Right.
Republican but is repulsed by Trump, who wants
Well,
a
no,
secure border,
I'm going
but
to push back though. In what ways has she gone hard right?
it's not even that she's gone hard right. It's that she's been there when it comes to the border policy. Like her whole thing during the debates, during the DNC, was that not only are we doing well at the border, we're going to do even more at the border. We're actually like doing better than Trump did, and like they're running, or they're trying to run to the right of him on that, right? And then it's like you have the campaign again. Like I mean, it's something I can't help but harp on it. The campaigning with the Cheneys is just out there. Like it really, like, I don't know who that attracts. I don't know. The only people that appeals to are the like neocon like media class of Washington. Like that doesn't appeal to
Yeah,
any
but
normal
I don't think
voters.
that really made any difference, to be honest, though. Like, to me, if there's anything that kind of made a difference, it's maybe more like the stuff with Palestine and Israel, and
Well, yeah, and that's a
just
completely different
you
discussion.
know,
I mean, there's no way that you're going to be able to
yeah,
run or do anything worse than what the Biden administration has done, and what I mean, Harris is now, she's representing that. She's holding the bag for that. And again, it like has enabled it to whatever degree. She's tried to distance herself from it. That's obviously the reason I don't even bring that up, is because again, that's something that's pretty bipartisan. The stuff that's happening there or with Israel is going to happen no matter which party, and that's a completely separate discussion. That is like not separate, obviously, but it's something that sickeningly is not even worth, I think, talking about from a perspective of like the dichotomy of the Republican and Democratic parties. The immigration rhetoric playing into that rather than resisting it, rather than trying to correct some of this stuff, just saying that we're gonna make even more, we're gonna be even tougher at the border than Trump was. We're gonna go, it just plays into those hands. And as far as the campaigning with the Cheneys, like, yeah, maybe that doesn't make a difference. But what that does, it makes more of a difference, I think, to the people who look at that and see and say to themselves, why are you campaigning with Dick Cheney? Why are you campaigning with Liz Cheney? Like it's almost like it's more off-putting than it is appealing. On the whole, it's a net negative, because all that's signaling is that like you really aren't any different from this Biden administration that spent the entire time saying that it was going to be a bridge between Democrats and Republicans. All the while, Republicans are just trashing, throwing as much as they can against the fence, hoping that it sticks. And then, basically like clowning him out of the race. You come in, there's a line of attack that seems to be working, and it's calling this party and its representatives and its main leader out for being out of touch, for being insulated within its own media bubble, for not understanding the will and the desire of the majority of Americans, and to get away from that and go into the areas they have, or to emphasize the things that they have. And then on top of that, you have the obviously disastrous situation with Israel and Palestine. It just feels like I think the crux of what I'm getting at is like, this is for a candidate who is competent, for a candidate who is basically not, going senile, aka Joe Biden. This is an unbelievably winnable race. This is a really, really, really. Trump has never been weaker. I think the MAGA movement has never been weaker. I think we've seen evidence of that left and right. They have a stranglehold on the party, which is kind of desperate for it to lose, I think, and like at least the core tenets of it. But they just seem to be going in these directions that these failed campaigns. I shouldn't say Biden didn't fail in 2020. Obviously they won, but like these campaigns have gone before, and it's like we're doing the same things over and over again. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what I mean. More of like, it's not that she's like going hard right on all these things, but it's like, it's the overarching feeling that she's tacking back to the center instead of, again, I'm not expecting her to, endorse, Medicare for all or anything like that. But like, it seemed like her pick of Tim Walz was an explicit recognition of the need to go left a little bit and distinguish yourself and separate yourself from the Biden administration, while also saying to progressives or, the other people that are, in your tent or maybe on the fence about it, or maybe have reservations for reasons like how the administration has handled Israel, and saying to them, listen, we care about you. This is a decision that is made based on the messaging that this guy can deliver and what we want this campaign to be, a campaign of joy, as you've said. And I don't think that you can run a joy-filled campaign that includes Dick Cheney in 2024.
Fair enough. I mean, I would say I do think that the Gaza stuff and the Cheney stuff is kind of linked in a way, though, of just like anyone who would have leaned towards voting for Harris but would be turned off from doing so by the Cheney endorsements was already upset about Gaza.
For sure.
So
yeah, that's fair.
So I think that I don't think it's trying to get them. I think they are trying to give that permission structure, as it gets called by a lot of people, to people more in the center and people who are more on the right who just don't like Trump to like come over and like join our side or whatever. And they're just like really hoping that their gamble that they have not turned off people to their left enough that they just don't vote for her or don't show up and vote for anyone. They're just really hoping that pays off, So it's a gamble. It's always a gamble. And I'm not sure it's a good gamble. Like, I'm not sure it's something you should be gambling about, but that's what they're doing.
Exactly.
Because she's still like, I think the thing that we like kind of hit on, if I remember correctly from our last conversations on the podcast about the campaign. Like the thing that seems to be tying her up is trying to, uh, you know, distance herself from Biden's presidency while also running on it at the same time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes sense that you're going to get kind of into a pretzel when you do that. And I think that that's what we're kind of seeing, don't you think?
Yeah, unquestionably. I mean, you can't, there's this Republican line of attack that's been going on. It's like, why didn't she do anything about it? Why hasn't she done this? Why hasn't she done that? She's been in the White House for 4 years. It's just like, well, we know why she hasn't done anything about it. She's not the president. But like you said, at the
Yeah.
same time, it's
Yeah.
like this is why I think I thought this was a problem early on, and I thought that maybe she should try to distance herself from Biden sooner. And it seems like there's been a real concerted effort to do that more lately. But it's because you can't listen, like you can highlight all the good stuff that's happened during his presidency. I don't think that he's been a particularly bad president, like not a historically bad president, but he was unpopular. By the time he dropped out, he was extremely unpopular. And the situation with Israel and Palestine has been, calling it a disaster is the understatement of the century. Like it's been an absolute um uh, just it's completely blown up in their face time and again. It's made them look incompetent. It's probably the greatest foreign policy failure in recent American history, maybe outside of the war in Iraq, and it's pushing that. Honestly, it might even be worse than that in the long run. So like you to hang on to that, you kind of have to wear it all the way through. And now it's like, well, Biden's making comments and he has something that he said taken out of context, and he already doesn't speak well. We all know that very well from what we saw from the last few months of him in the public eye. Like, you can't really run away from it now. And I think again that was a problem that I had back in whenever our first discussion was, and then it's like you see them rolling out these different Republicans and kind of going after the center. Like you said, it's a gamble. It's a conscious choice. It's like you're saying to the people that maybe have reservations about what's going on in Gaza and between Israel and Palestine. Like you're saying, we don't care about your votes as much as we care about the, phantom Republican who sees me with Liz Cheney and thinks, hey, you know what? This is a good person. I'm going to vote for you. They're making a choice between, if there is, I mean, again, I don't know if it's a dichotomy straight up, but like they're making a choice between those two voters or those two voting areas.
Well, Joe, why don't we kind of like go into our last topic here? This will be our last chat before election day. And I do feel like we're kind of starting to get into like guessing at things. So maybe this is a good time to do this. So what are you thinking about or focusing on most leading into that and coming out of it on the other side? What are your expectations going into election day, if any?
Well, despite everything I just said, I actually am relatively confident that Harris is going to win. I've been kind of confident in that for a while. And I think I kind of touched on it earlier. What we've seen from Trump and I think the MAGA Republican Party over the last few weeks, and like, with that MSG rally, I think it's a movement that has hit some sort of a nadir. Like it just doesn't feel like it's connecting in the way it certainly doesn't. I mean, the 2016 enthusiasm is probably not replicable. And obviously he got more votes in 2020, but lost by, quite a bit, at least in terms of like total number of votes. But it just feels like it's a campaign that's been operating out of a position of weakness. It feels like, and I think this again, I don't mean to keep saying, to go back to one of our previous discussions, this campaign has felt like a personification of an older Trump in the sense that he doesn't seem to want it in the same way that he did. He doesn't seem to want to do the work that he did in 2016. He campaigned his ass off in 2016. Like, for all of his faults, for all of the bad things you can say about him, and there's plenty, he really campaigned the hell out of that election, and Hillary Clinton didn't. The Clinton campaign, like, I think they were kind of famously trying to run things up in the bluest states like California and New York to like make the victory look even more decisive, and turns out there wasn't a victory to be had at all. And it feels like the Republican Party is in that position now. And I feel like obviously all the messaging has changed, and they've done what they had to do from all that perspective. I don't think that they've like sort of really fully adjusted to it being a race against Kamala Harris, because I think, going back to it, I think Trump thought he was going to walk back into the White House if he had to face
Hmm.
Joe Biden again. I think that was the biggest curveball that Democrats could have thrown. They threw it, and he, swung at a ball in the dirt and is now waiting for the umpire to, say that he tipped it or something. I just don't know um, where it's at right now. That said, like, I mean, I wouldn't bet on Harris to win. There's still a pathway, I think, for Trump to pull it out, and we'll certainly see. If he doesn't, there will probably be some sort of reaction. Um, Maybe a very light way of putting it. But I based on the polling that we've seen, and based on the fact that it seems like the Harris campaign is actually doing stuff, like they're actually having people canvass, they're having people phone bank. I'm sure that's happening, but we've heard all about how like the Trump campaign privatized all of
Hmm.
their ground game and their canvassing. That's all been outsourced to different companies. Like
Yeah.
the Harris campaign is doing that stuff, and yeah, based on all that and based on the historical precedent, I would be very surprised at this point if Harris didn't win. I wouldn't be, shocked, but I think at this point it would be a relative surprise.
Yeah, I would just say never underestimate the power of Republicans to take advantage of every tilt in the system towards their side to their advantage. They don't have to win as big to actually win. They don't have to get as many votes to actually win as Democrats have to, just systemically. They have a Supreme Court that is just ready to step in at a moment's notice and do whatever they fucking need to do, so that a couple of them can retire and go live on their fucking bribe boats, as someone said. Um, and then, like, even, I mean, I don't know how much of it, like, this is where I start to get into, like, wait, am I going into conspiratorial thinking here? I hope not. Like, there was talk about, like, was the MSG rally not so much about him trying to win the presidency, because obviously he's not going to win New York, even if he thinks he should, but it's trying to run up numbers in like House races in New York, because he wants to make sure that there's a GOP House when it comes time to actually certify the election and all this stuff. Um, and I don't know how much I buy that or not, but like, there's all this chatter, every which way, all the time, of like all the ways in which they can cheat and will cheat, and we'd be dumb not to believe some version of it.
Yeah,
And by cheat, I don't mean just like actually steal, but I mean, like I said, take advantage of a system that is built to favor them.
yeah.
Unfortunately,
No,
so
for sure. I mean, we've seen, I think in the last few weeks, there have been a lot of what you would call Republican pollsters producing polls with Trump in comfortable leads in certain swing states. Um,
yeah,
every single time I log on Twitter, I see an ad for that poly market, which is the political betting market that has Trump pretty consistently at like 64,
yeah, yeah,
66% chance of winning, which is not a poll. It's a literal betting market that Americans can't, I don't believe we
yeah,
can
yeah,
legally bet on it anyway. But like, they're narratively, they have put themselves in a position where if Trump does lose, whether it's by a relatively small margin or maybe a little bit more of a comfortable one, they can call bullshit. And obviously their bullshit will
yeah.
be bullshit, or their bullshit call will be bullshit. But they've laid the groundwork for that. We all know it's coming. Again, this is how, as I said before, Trump shifts our center of expectation. We know that if he loses, they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that there's chaos and that the narratives are built up and that people have in their heads the idea that how could
Hmm.
he lose when he was ahead or they were tied in the polls? Like this is clearly fraud or whatever. So they're greasing the wheels in that way. It won't be as easy for them to do it because he's not literally in the White House. He doesn't have the protections of the office as he did when he did it in 2020. Um, But as far as like what you mentioned about the conspiratorial thinking, I feel like a lot of people who are, left leaning or Democratic voting kind of think that way. They're like thinking about all this sinister stuff. And it's very much understandable because, there are a lot of very smart people in the Republican orbit, and there are a lot of people in positions of power that can do this kind of thing. But I just, I don't want to sound naive, but like, I don't want to ascribe that much forethought to these folks, like at least to Trump himself and to the campaign. I just think that they're cocky and overconfident. I really do. I mean, again,
I
that
hope
could
you're right.
easily prove wrong. Right. Of course. Like that could very easily prove wrong, but I really think that as far as like the energy of the race is going, I just don't think that they anticipated it would be this difficult. I think that they thought that people would come flocking back to them. And I think it goes back to something that I mention over and over again, both on here to people that I speak to about this. Trump and Trump's people and the closest kind of orbit of MAGA, they are so they are so insulated. They are so wrapped up in this bubble that they have
Hmm.
created for themselves. With media, now with Twitter as a huge part of that, with Elon Musk and everything else. Um, it's a feedback loop, and it is out of touch. Like it is not connected to reality in so many different ways. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump ultimately can't win the election. I'm not saying that, but I think that it's so hard to break out of that. And when I go back to what I said about Clinton in 2016, I think that was the same thing with Clinton in 2016. I think that they had built up such a bubble and such an insulary environment where they were like, who the fuck is voting for Trump? Trump is insane. Trump is a bad person. He's an idiot. He's all these different things. Why would anyone vote for him? That they just sort of didn't do the work. And I feel like that's the position, ironically enough, that Trump and his campaign are in now. That's just the overarching sense that I get. And that's why I am
Hmm.
relatively confident that, and this is not to say that there won't be challenges, that there won't be a ton of chaos in the aftermath, but I am pretty confident that Harris is going to win. And I don't know that it's going to be like a landslide, but I wouldn't be shocked if it were.
Sure. You mean electorally or popular vote or both?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not placing any bets on it, but
I do think that what you're kind of saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, or not taking your words out of context, I think it's right that, like, let's say Clinton in 2016, they kind of took their foot off the gas at the end because they were just like,
yeah,
we're not going to lose.
exactly. We're not losing to Trump. It's not possible.
They seemed very overconfident, especially like after the like Hollywood Access tape and all these things where everyone was like, well, he's cooked. And I do think nobody takes him for granted anymore. And
Right. You can't.
Harris certainly isn't. Like, she's campaigning through election day. It's still fucking frustrating as hell that all of the campaigning happens in like half a dozen states, like,
Yeah.
and nobody
Right.
else's voice matters. It's all about, that's always, until the electoral college is abolished, that's going to be a frustrating problem, I think. But that's a whole other conversation. But they are taking everything seriously. I feel like even they're doing a good job of sort of counter programming in a way that I don't think Clinton, I don't remember her in her campaign doing, of like this ellipse rally that happened for us, and as we're recording yesterday, her giving a speech in the same place where Trump tried to stage a coup 4 years ago, essentially, and kind of also, whether it was through coincidence or not, like it seemed like counter programming to the MSG rally, that of her just having this big event where, by all indications, they had so many people there, so many more than they ever even expected,
Mm-hmm.
and there seems to be an enthusiasm, whether it's for Harris or just to not have Trump again. Like, it seems genuine. And like I said, I don't think she and her campaign are taking the foot off the gas. They're campaigning through election day. And I hope, to my earlier point, I hope that they are also, so to speak, campaigning past election day and are ready to take on all the legal challenges and other things that are sure to come and fight to win this election, however is needed within the realm of law, you know?
Right. You'd have to hope so. I mean, after what
But
happened in 2020, I don't think that you can run a campaign against this candidate and not think of that possibility. And, you know,
and don't expect it to be Rudy Giuliani and that fucking misfit crew running things this time.
right.
I do
It's
think
gonna
that
be
like they're going to have better people on the job doing this time, probably is
Sure.
my prediction. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No. The other thing is, you know, as far as like the Hillary campaign being overconfident, I think part of the Trump's campaign overconfidence now is not just that they're going to win, which I do think that they're going to, I think that they think they're going to win electorally, but it's also like, hey, if we don't, or if it's close,
Yeah, they don't care, I guess.
they're just like, we have these different wheels greased to push the narrative forward that we didn't lose. So
Yeah.
there is this very weird sort of reality in which we now live, that we know what's
Mhm.
coming no matter what, and like there's nothing that we can do to stop it. The people that have like a little bit of a, you know, if you have a little bit of a sense of history and you've looked at, like, for example, again, the comparison is a little, you know, on the nose and maybe overdone, but like people watching what happened in Germany in the 1930s, right? The way that that country swung
Yeah.
hard to the right and elected leaders who, you know, installed a fascist regime. It just feels like we're in the middle of that now, and there's like nothing that, you know, we can really do. It's like when I say, like, just very casually, like, yeah, we know Trump's going to challenge the results of the election if he loses. Like, that's not anything that happened before the last time he lost. So it's like, but we
Right.
all accept it as reality. We all know that that's just how it is now. That's what it's going to be with this version of the Republican Party with Donald Trump at the helm. And it is really, I don't know, it's just this limbo state that it feels like we're living in, where, you know, you kind of can see the moves before they're coming. And again, this is all under the assumption that Harris is going to win, which she might not, of course, but it's a bit surreal to like watch this unfold, react to it, of course, as we do, discuss it with you or whoever else, with people in your life. And just to sort of like, yeah, this is really, he's really going to do this. He's been telegraphing it for years. He's going to do it again. Like, and it just is part of
Mhm.
this whole process. You know, it's bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that gives me hope, I guess, maybe this is important to think about, I don't know, is people who are smarter than me that I follow, that I think that they have good ways of thinking about this stuff, like seem to be where you are, Joe, of feeling somewhat confident that Harris is going to win and is in fact doing better than the horse race coverage might lead you to believe. You know, like I saw that Trump had tweeted something about like basically already essentially challenging the results in Pennsylvania, saying that there's cheating going on, you know, to lay the groundwork, you know, and it being pointed out that like, would he be doing that if he thought he was actually going to win Pennsylvania? You know, like they were making the point that like, well, I guess somebody showed Trump finally showed Trump the internal polling of his campaign for Pennsylvania that probably shows him not doing as well as public polling shows or something like that. So I don't know. I don't know if that means anything or not, but yeah, I hope it comes out right.
Well, it's going to be either way. It's going to be a really fascinating, like, obviously the next few days leading up to the actual election, and then the days afterward are going to be extremely. I mean, it's again, it's not the kind of fascinating you really are looking forward to, but it is a very fascinating election to witness and talk about and participate in.
To kind of your point before, Joe, of this kind of weird feeling of inevitability and waiting. I don't know if you have voted already, but I early voted last week, and it was just this weird feeling of this mix of relief and anticlimax, just because like I had so long to wait to see what the hell is actually going to happen, and like all I feel like I can do now is just pay attention and talk about it because I've done my part, So
Right.
I don't know that for some reason that connects for me to that feeling of inevitability and sort of like, what else can you do? We're sort of just like commenting on a thing that seems preordained somehow. We just don't know how it's preordained. Does that make sense?
No, for sure. I mean, there is nothing else for us to do but
Yeah.
this at this point. I mean, there's obviously like, if
Yeah.
you feel strongly about one candidate or another, you can phone bank, you can text bank, you can whatever.
Yeah.
But,
Absolutely.
at this point in the race, it's just a waiting game, and it's like trying to, if you have anxiety about it, controlling your anxiety as best you can and waiting to see what happens next. Because it could go a bunch of different ways, and no way that it goes will not be interesting. And I say that from a very, uh, I guess, privileged perspective. That like I'm able to sit here and talk about this stuff and take it in as it comes, and obviously react to it and discuss it the way that we do. But it's it's truly, truly fascinating. And as much as I have dreaded this election season in so many different ways, and I'm very, very glad, as you said, there's a relief that it's almost over. And when I do vote, it'll feel like a bit of an exhale. Um, it is extremely captivating, and I say that from the perspective of politics as
Mhm.
entertainment, which I think, for some of us, it absolutely is, but also just from the, from the perspective of like world events and how this is going to affect the trajectory of this country, of the people that live here, of you, me, our families, our extended orbits, and so many other millions of people, both here and across the world. Um, this is why it's so compelling, you know?
I wouldn't call it politics as entertainment. I don't think that's what it is for me, and I would venture to guess for you. Like I think for some people that's what it is. It's just something to watch, something to engage with. I do think we both come from a place of caring deeply about the results. And for me, speaking for myself, I think that's why I can't stop paying attention to the stuff, because I'm
Yeah.
just like, I need to know. I need to know what's going to happen. And there's no way to know, but that's not going to stop me from trying to figure it out. So it's not just like horse race entertainment to me. And I don't think it probably is for you, but you can, you
It
can,
is. Yeah.
push back on that if you like.
No, I would agree. It's only really entertainment for me when you have Trump cooking fries at a McDonald's. That's what I'm really entertained by.
Was that your favorite moment of the campaign?
I wish I brought that up when you said, "Was there anything I missed?" Because yeah, that was the happiest we've seen Trump, I feel
Yeah.
like, in years. He was in his element, and if only we
Yeah,
could all
yeah.
be that happy for just a moment.
Yeah. If only he could just have a string of jobs like that and leave the rest of us alone. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents, and thank you to our guest, Joe Virgillito. The music in this podcast is composed by Hansdale Sue. My name is Jeremiah Lee McVay. If you like what you hear in the show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps us to expand our audience and is much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Every little bit helps, and it, again, is truly appreciated. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com, and you can find more information about this show and everything else that Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.